Hey everyone, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate the organizers for the invitation as well. So I want to tell you a little bit about how we think about product development at Amazon and specifically on Amazon Bracket. So one of the things that you hear about Amazon is that, we like to say that we are Earth's most customer-centric company. Now, this is a very technology-centric field. But the way we think about products and product development at AWS is that we like to start from the customer first and work backwards from that. And so what that really means is that there's sort of an urban legend that in the old days of Amazon, back when Jeff Bezos was around, we would actually have a spare room, a spare chair in every single meeting room. And so whenever the discussions got really technical and people started arguing about, whether we should build this API or that API and so on, the idea was, let's just think back to the customer. Are we making sure that we're actually building the right things that will delight the customer? Now, of course, since the days of the pandemic, if you see an empty room, an empty chair in the meeting room, it's probably just your colleague who decided to work from home that day. But at least back in the day, that's how we thought about it. So what are customers telling us in this industry, in the quantum computing space? And one of the things that we see is that pioneers in this industry are clearly emerging. So, we've been hearing from a number of these customers, throughout the session. Yesterday, there were some exciting results that came out from JP Morgan and Quantinuum. We heard from Citi yesterday. And later on today, we're going to hear from Airbus and BMW about this challenge in automotive and mobility that they've been running together with us on AWS through Amazon Bracket. And here, these customers are out there. They're engaging with the industry. They're talking to the experts. They're out there. They're hiring teams. They're trying to build up a quantum center of excellence. They're publishing papers, and they're basically doing research and innovation and sort of pushing the boundaries of this technology day in and day out. But the real opportunity is actually everybody else. Today, most AWS customers, most of the customers that today, day in and day out, use storage and EC2 and all these other services on AWS, they are not doing quantum today. And when they come to Seattle or they come to New York and they ask us about, what should we be doing in quantum computing, one of the biggest dilemmas that we have is when is the right time to get those customers to engage? And that's the real opportunity. And I want to give you a sense of scale of what I really mean by that opportunity. So today, more than 100,000 customers are running production workloads, AI/ML workloads on AWS. And so these customers are your household names from everyone from 3M to Philips to Ferrari to NFL. And we have account teams and business development managers and solutions architects like myself when I joined AWS 5 years ago, who are supporting these customers and thinking about when is the right time to expose emerging technologies to these customers. When is the right moment for us to go to State Farm and say, hey, you should be thinking about quantum computing because we think quantum computing can help you modernize a specific workflow, loan workflow, for example, that you've been working on for the last decade and so on. And so that's really the challenge that we collectively as an industry here have is what is that inflection point? When should we be doing this? And if you ask me, this is a conference about commercializing quantum, if you ask me what it means to commercialize quantum computing, it's really when we can stand up on stage in front of you like this and basically say, today 100,000 AWS customers are using quantum on AWS. That's what commercialization really means to us. And so if you sort of think about, what are the core drivers for why customers want to migrate workloads to the cloud, there's really three of them. The first one is agility. The cloud allows you to spin up resources, spin up instances, whenever you want. So if you've got an idea, you can test it quickly. The second one is cost savings. Naturally with the cloud, you can basically trade capital expense for variable expense. So now you don't have to design your data center for the peak demand days that you're going to get, like Prime Day, for example, or Thanksgiving when you get the most amount of shoppers. But rather, you can scale your demand up and down. You can scale your costs up and down as a result. And finally, you can really achieve that elasticity of scale through the elasticity of the hardware, classical hardware and compute infrastructure and storage and databases and so on the cloud. Now, AWS is really a collection of 200, 250 odd services. And if you're running a service for databases and you're running a service for storage and so on, these are the right value propositions and these are the right drivers. But one of the issues that we faced when I joined AWS and I was working in the machine learning industry was what are the same drivers for emerging technologies? And as far as we're concerned, quantum is just one of many emerging technologies in the portfolio that we have. And so we have sort of a general way of thinking about it. And what are really those drivers that ask customers to want to move or think about the cloud when it comes to emerging tech? And it's really three of them. The first one is that customers want choice. And so today, when there's uncertainty, when there's technology uncertainty, it's really all about reducing risk. And the way you reduce risk is you give choice to customers, because it's way too early to be saying that you want to pick a particular winner. The second one is you want to make experimentation cheap, because cost savings is not really about ROI. But what you want to be able to do is reduce the barrier to entry for customers to start testing things out, trying things out, and moving the needle forward and discovering potential use cases. And the third one is that you want to build a service that allows customers to ramp up that learning curve as quickly as possible. That comes through building unified interfaces, but also by giving customers the comfort and by building the guardrails that allow them to experiment safely. Because really, what customers need in order to get started is that they need to understand that when they do these experiments, this is not going to break anything. And so those are the sort of three drivers that we learned when we sort of started to put machine learning services out there for customers. And so if you sort of think about it, we've been trying to use the same approach for all emerging technologies, and the one that's sort of very near and dear to us right now, and it's sort of very top of mind for a number of us for various different reasons, is generative AI. And so late last year, when we launched the Amazon Bedrock service, the Amazon Bedrock service basically provides those three capabilities. It allows customers to experiment with multiple different foundational models from third parties as well as from Amazon through a single API, and it does that by providing pay-as-you-go pricing, no upfront commitments, and so on. So it's essentially exactly kind of taking that same playbook and now applying that to Gen AI, making experimentation with Gen AI easy, because it is an emerging technology and it's way too early to really understand which of these models and what are going to be the end applications and so on. So 3 years ago, when we launched the Amazon Bracket service, we thought about it in exactly the same way. We wanted to provide customers choice. And so today we support 5 different hardware modalities on the Bracket service, and ranging from basically trapped ion systems from IonQ, superconducting gate-based systems, and a neutral atom system as well. And just a couple of weeks ago, we're super excited to launch the IQM system and onboard IQM to our family of hardware providers that we support on Amazon Bracket. IQM is also it's a Finnish superconducting gate-based system provider, and they're the first time we're actually expanding the Bracket service in the European Union. And so now customers in the EU can freely experiment with the system on a pay-as-you-go basis, and they can do this with no upfront commitments, no upfront costs, and so on. So you basically just bring your circuit, submit a number of shots, and you just pay for what you use. And so that's really about making experimentation cheap. When we launched the Bracket service, we also decided that these different modalities have very different underlying timescales for executing circuits and so on. And we didn't want to put that complexity on top of the customer. And so we decided to launch this with a unified set of pricing dimensions as well. And so today you only pay for the number of shots, or you pay for the amount of time that you're running the system, but you don't have to pay anything upfront in order to use it. And the third idea here is that we wanted to ultimately, when we launched the Bracket service, integrate it very closely with the rest of AWS. Because essentially, one of the things that we have learned as being super important is that ultimately quantum will just be a part of a bigger piece of a number of a broader workflow. And essentially providing customers the security and the guardrails are essential for them to be able to start testing and iterating on these systems. So in launching, the service about 3 years ago, there's a number of lessons that we learned along the way. And I talked about customer obsession. There's about staying close to the customer and staying connected to their needs, and sort of learning from those lessons and iterating and using that to basically improve the products and improve the services that we offer. So I just wanted to share a few of these lessons with you today. The first one is that this is still a very, very emerging technology. I mentioned generative AI. Quantum is, even before, in sort of maturity relative to Gen AI. And so it's super important to really approach this technology with your eyes wide open. It's way too early to sort of think about winners in this space. The technology is advancing incredibly rapidly. Just yesterday, there were announcements made from Continuum. We've heard announcements from Quera and so on, and IBM and others. This space is moving very, very fast. And so right now, the time to experiment, it's order to, you want to sort of be able to try out different things and see which one is interesting, which one moves the needle. So for example, if you were here last year, we had another provider on the service, which was from Xanadu. We had their Borealis system. And that system was capable of enabling customers to run a quantum supremacy experiment, which they had published in Nature. One of the things we learned after operating that device for a year is that the market and the industry had moved on. That was no longer a use case that customers were interested in. And so a year later, we decided to take that system off the service. And instead, we've launched new systems. We've launched new systems since. And so we want to kind of have that agility as well on the Bracket service in order to give customers the opportunity to be able to experiment. The second thing is that, even though this technology is disruptive, we keep hearing the word disruption, but innovation ultimately happens incrementally. Innovation happens when you come in and day out and move the ball forward slowly. And this is what we see customers doing. And this is what we saw in the machine learning space. There's sort of kind of two types of hardware providers. We have this sort of unique vantage point where we get to talk to a number of different providers in the industry. And we kind of generally, they sort of fall into two camps. There's a camp where the hardware providers want to engage very closely with customers. They want to sit down with the customer. They want to learn the use cases and they want to iterate. And then there's another camp that sort of says, we're going to show up one day with this amazing device and customers are just going to flock to it and they're going to start running their workloads. And I can tell you from my own experience in machine learning, machine learning is a technology that was mature a long time ago. It has taken many, many, many years for us to get to these 100,000 customers because ultimately, it is not necessarily about the technology. It is about the process and it is about the people. And that just takes a very, very long time. The third thing is that this is an industry where one size fits all is just not going to work for a very, very long time. So those tip of the iceberg customers that I was talking about, they want to engage with hardware providers on a daily basis. They want dedicated time on the box. They chase performance because they're looking to move the needle for their business. They're looking to be the first one on top of that mountain, right? So they're going to go wherever the hardware, whichever provider has the best performance, that's where they're going to go to run their workloads. On the other hand, everybody else, the folks on the other side of that iceberg, they're just trying to learn. They just want to know, how do I get started? What is the state of play in this technology? When is this going to become relevant to me? And then there's now an emerging sort of third persona, which is, government hubs and government hub administrators that want to give access to private on-prem devices to their researchers in order to accelerate, basically sort of build regional ecosystems. And so these are wildly different customer requirements. And so we have to sort of be attuned to that and realize that, this sort of one size fits all just does not work in this market. And then the fourth thing that I want to say is that, even though the qubits might be in a vacuum, this technology will not develop in a vacuum. Ultimately, quantum computing is something that will be inextricably linked with classical computing. And that's one of the reasons why we launched Bracket deeply integrated with AWS, because we believe that these workflows ultimately will require CPUs, GPUs, and it'll require you to really think about the end-to-end. It'll require you to think about security. It's going to require you to think about storage. The same way when you try to put an ML workload in production, if you're a bank and you're trying to do a machine learning model for credit card fraud detection, that model is a tiny, tiny piece of that actual workflow. You're thinking about data security and encryption and KMS, and you're thinking about, inference and inference latencies and all of those types of things. And quantum will have to go through exactly that same transition when these workloads become real. So having learned some of those lessons, one of the things when you think about the cloud, we think about the cloud as a place for customers to innovate. But the way clouds democratize things, the way clouds enable customers to innovate is essentially by establishing a set of guardrails. And those guardrails can be quite wide, but customers need those guardrails to feel comfortable innovating within them. The cloud model is a very hands-off model. We provide customers a set of APIs, and customers basically use those APIs, builders use those APIs to build their applications on top. But quantum is at that earlier stage, like I said. It's at a much earlier stage of evolution. We need to find ways to connect customers to hardware providers. And this is a very, very unusual thing for us to do at AWS. Generally at AWS, we like to get out of the way as much as possible and just let builders do their thing. But late last year at reInvent, our large conference, our largest builder conference in November, we're super excited to launch this new program called Amazon Bracket Direct. With Bracket Direct, what we're doing is that we're giving customers dedicated access to the machine. And for the first time, we're actually enabling customers to directly talk to the hardware providers and the hardware provider science teams and their research teams to optimize their workloads to suit the specific machines so that they can really sit down with the people that are out there building the devices to try to see if their workload can be improved by doing a calibration run or by adding error mitigation or error suppression or adding some other net new functionality. And for hardware providers in the room, this is really exciting as well, because now this actually gives a channel for hardware providers to bring emergent technologies and emergent capabilities that may not be ready for all customers, but expose them to a select set of experts, get feedback, and create that fast closed loop feedback that can allow them to iterate and develop their technology and ultimately make that more generally available. So recently with the QERA system, for example, we announced a feature called local detuning that allows customers to basically locally detune and change the electromagnetic fields on the QERA lattice. This is essential for some customers that want to explore more complex optimization algorithms or complex, richer Hamiltonians for exploring phase transitions and things like that. And we launched that feature as part of Bracket Direct. We also made the IonQ Forte system, which is a system that's available by reservation only. It's IonQ's latest, highest fidelity system available through this program as well. So with all of that, how can you as a customer get ready? What are some of the programs that we have for you to get started now? So the first thing I want to say is that, like going back to this message of, even though the technology may be years away, the innovation is going to require incremental improvements, incremental development, and ultimately, sort of making small amounts of progress on a day-to-day basis. So if you're net new to quantum, we recently launched this digital badge that allows you to get started with how we explore quantum on AWS. And you can get this badge and you can put it on LinkedIn and share it with your friends and so on. If you're an executive and you're interested in getting a session on what is the state of play of quantum computing industry as a whole, how should you be thinking about building your organization's quantum strategy? This is something that we in our go-to-market teams can help you with as well. We also provide dedicated hands-on workshops for your technical teams to get going and to really understand, picking sort of specific use cases in your vertical on how quantum computing could impact your vertical. If you want to basically do an actual deeper research engagement, we have a professional services team where we can engage with you on sort of a research POC that will result in some sort of publication or generating some kind of IP ultimately. And then finally, if you have a workload, but you're looking to connect with a hardware provider to run that workload on their service, then just go to the Bracket Direct console page, click on reserve device. It'll send one of us a form. We'll get on the phone with you. We'll talk to you about your workload, and we'll bring the hardware providers in, and we can do this as a three-way engagement to really sort of try to push the needle forward. So with that, thank you all for your time. And yeah, I can take any questions, but I think I'm wasted. So.